Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hey everybody, this is Ryan Singer. I'm very excited today because we have Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove joining us. And if you listen to this program, this is a name you already know, and I'm very excited to have him join the program today. Author of The Roots of Consciousness, Psi Development Systems, the PK Man. You know him most certainly as the wonderful host of Thinking Aloud, and then the new iteration, New Thinking Aloud. Not to mention, I'll have to ask you, to clarify. I mean, anytime you go to a great when you research any kind of great consciousness research place, I mean, Dr. Mishlove is there somewhere, whether it's the Ryan Research Center or Philosophical Research Society or at the university that they have there. It seems like Dr. Mishlove he's attached, he's involved, he's got boots on the ground in this awesome field of new thinking for years now. So thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ryan.
So let's kind of get started, if you don't mind, with how much I loved the PK Man. What a wonderful book. To those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, I can't recommend it highly enough. I mean, it's probably the most intense and thorough examination of psychokinesis when it comes to one individual that I've ever come across to this point. Would you say Ted Owens, who is the subject of this book, is one of the main, or is maybe one of the greatest examples of potentially what is possible in psi phenomena in a person?
I would say so. When I did the original research, I worked with a well-known investigator of the paranormal, D. Scott Rogo, who was a distant cousin of mine and who was very, very knowledgeable about the history of parapsychology and psychical research. And Scott used to say that he thought Ted Owens was the most extreme case of psychokinesis in the history of parapsychology.
Wow. I mean, when you go through the detailed events of the book in Ted Owens' life, it becomes this grand story of a man that seemingly is very aware of what he's capable of, and yet also when it comes to the interesting theme, one of the big themes of the book is what is the moral responsibility of someone who has the power to change these huge events on a mass scale, and did he have a blind spot when it came to what the world considers to be moral responsibility of having power? And that's a very interesting discussion that's brought up throughout the book that I don't think a lot of people talk about in the world of paranormal abilities or PK abilities. Have you kind of take a very diplomatic approach throughout the book when it comes to Ted and all of that. Have you swayed one way or the other in recent years?
Well, I suppose if parapsychologists have a weakness, it's that maybe we're more interested in finding out whether this phenomenon is real and how effective it can be, and we're less interested perhaps in looking at whether it's being put to good or bad purposes. And I think you're right. Parapsychologists should be paying more attention to that sort of thing. There was, for example, back in the 1970s, a researcher in France named William Wolkowski at the Henri Poincaré Institute, and he was conducting psychokinesis research with a very talented subject named Jean-Paul Girard, who demonstrated the ability to affect the genetics of fruit flies using psychokinesis. And when Wolkowski began looking at his data, he realized with horror that this might be a terrible effect if it were unleashed on the world, and he shut down his research. And in retrospect, I kind of admire him for doing that. So, although I've been very active when I investigated Ted Owens and documented his psychokinesis, it's not something I necessarily think that the human race is ready for. We're having a very difficult time handling the powers that we already have.
Yeah, that's a great point, and the idea that someone could, with their mind, or whether it was like someone like Ted Owens who talked about space intelligences, and it's even and Uri Geller is also mentioned in the book. Like, do these powers come from without? Do they come from within? And what is the connection there? But to have someone be able to affect genetic makeup is kind of a frightening thought there, to think that someone else could have now power over you on like a physical, like in internal in your makeup. I do understand why that would be so frightening.
Well, the fact is, though, if psychokinesis is real, and there's a lot of research that certainly suggests that it is, uh, it's there, and certain people are going to have that talent and have that ability to affect other people in a negative way, regardless of whether the research continues or not.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how you reference William James and PK Man about when it comes to like just in general the field of psychical research. I'll read a quote here from the book, that William James, one of America's most brilliant thinkers, argued that the evidence should be considered like a bundle of sticks. Each individual stick might be easily broken, but when tied together into a bundle, they are as strong as steel. And at the time this book was written, I wonder if you think that bundle has now turned into, I guess, a bushel. I mean, I guess a bushel is bigger than a bundle. I'm not real sure, but do you think now that we have a huge, gigantic bundle of sticks in the world of psychical research evidence?
Well, sure, because the Society for Psychical Research was founded in England in 1882. So we have nearly 150 years worth of empirical evidence that's been accumulated, well over 1,000 experiments and many case studies that's been going on. And in fact, just last year, the American Psychological Association, which frankly, I can tell you this, psychologists are probably the most hostile to parapsychology because they feel the most threatened by it. And but they published an article in their flagship journal, the American Psychologist, reviewing the results of some 1,700 experiments in parapsychology and showing that on the basis of what is known as meta-analysis, the results of these experiments are overwhelmingly positive when you look at them as a whole.
Wow, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. The world seems to be, I guess, waking up to the idea of this phenomena being something that is very real, that many people like yourselves and others are like, one of the most fascinating characters I've kind of uncovered, or not uncovered, but come across in my research on this is, one of the early guys, Charles Richet. And the fascinating thing about psychical research in the beginning is, I guess it's just like any other field, and people might be intimidated from the outside looking in, thinking like, oh, I don't even know if I could start to understand like the history of psychical research. But then you start getting into it and you start understanding, oh, these are people that have the same, and a lot of the same themes come up, like a division in philosophy. Like, should we be focusing on physical phenomena? Should we be focusing on mental phenomena? And you see that like it's almost like the same problems come up in any other thing, causing divides that can be detrimental to the field itself. Do you feel like psychical research has overcome some of those early divides that separated many of the researchers?
Well, I would say the biggest division today is metaphysical, really. There are certain researchers who consider themselves conventional materialistic scientists, and they believe that we will eventually come up with an explanation for remote viewing and precognition and telepathy based on our current scientific understanding of the world. And then there are those who say, actually, the only way we can really interpret this data is to have a completely different metaphysics, and that is that reality is not fundamentally physical. Reality itself is fundamentally a mental phenomenon. And so that's the big division. But I think we're at a point in history where, for the most part, the arguments that take place are cordial and.
Well, that's good. That's good that they're, at least, everybody's back at the table, so to speak. It sounds like, and that's a good thing.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think intuition comes into this as far as like being part of the mental reality? And because I know, like it seems like in the modern world, and this is coming from my perspective, which I'm not a scientist. I'm a stand-up comedian who loves all things psychical, paranormal, supernatural, and things like that. But when it comes to like the intuition and I guess it would be considered more rational way that our society seems to have gone in the last couple decades. Do you think that there is a resurgence of parapsychology that's happening or is soon to happen, with people reopening up to that, understanding that maybe we went too far on one side of the spectrum?
Well, I have to agree with you that we seem to have gone off balance. Carl Jung said there are four primary mental functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. And it seems as if our culture for couple hundred years has emphasized sensation and thought to the disadvantage of feeling and intuition. And we need to address that. And I think the field of parapsychology does address that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to trying to understand what, a lot of people might think is just it's ununderstandable or it's impossible to understand. I do wonder about the trying to measure what some people think is supernatural with natural methods, and maybe we're discounting our own ability intuitively to be able to just know things and to go with things. When it comes to Ted Owens, I guess he's a great example because of just like how profound some of these things seem to be. And for those who haven't read the book yet, we're talking about affecting major weather patterns, ending droughts, with the implications of, airplanes crashing with people on them. Now, do you think when he referenced like space intelligences, like this idea that there was an outside force that was, helping him or allowing him to affect these changes, where do you fall on that? I'm just curious. Do you think it's more of like that's a way for him to understand the power, almost as a representation or a personification of it?
It's a problem that I was never able to fully resolve, which is he using his own innate psychokinetic abilities, which he often claimed, or is he which he often also claimed, telepathically sending suggestions to other dimensional beings who existed, as he would like to say, in an invisible UFO, a giant invisible UFO hovering over the planet, and then they would perform these effects. I don't want to discount the existence of the space intelligences, as he called them, but of course, I don't have any direct evidence one way or the other. except to say, I did do this experiment. I call it the San Francisco experiment in the book because he was known for producing UFO phenomenon. And I asked him, can you do that for me? Can you make a UFO appear? And he said, I'll make three of them appear within a 100-mile radius, or I think a 50-mile radius of San Francisco within a 90-day window. And at one point he said, this is going to be so dramatic, it will be seen by hundreds of people. It'll be photographed, and a picture will be published on the front page of one of your local newspapers. And that, in fact, did happen. So the question is, was that UFO that was photographed and videotaped and seen by hundreds of people, both from the air and from the ground, was that a psychokinetic projection from his mind, or was that some sort of an independent device, an extraterrestrial or interdimensional vehicle of some sort? I have not been able to resolve that question.
Yeah, and I guess that's like the beauty of being alive to some degree for me. It's that there's always going to be more questions, and and that such is the nature of our curiosity, I guess. And sometimes we really want a definitive answer, and we just have to, at some point, accept the fact that we might not get it. You talk about the displacement effect a little bit in the book as well. And, basically for people listening, it's when someone, like, let's say someone has, the PK phenomena, or they're able to like move objects, and then like they're trying to do it, and then maybe the object that they're not focusing on the table moves. I think you reference Nina Kulagina, if I'm saying her name correctly. And there seems to be like a perfection expected of people who claim to have an ability to do something like this that we might not expect from a human being in some other area of, like, let's say, motor skills. Do you find that there's an uneven or an I don't know what the exact phrase I'm looking for is, but like the expectations are almost higher for these people as they would be if they were just trying to demonstrate any other ability or skill?
Well, it's sort of like the people who say global warming or climate change can't be real because we have winter. You have to have an appreciation for the statistics and science involved. Take, for example, in baseball, I think everybody would agree that Babe Ruth was one of the greatest baseball players of all time. But the truth is he struck out more often than he hit home runs, even though he's known as being a home run hitter. His batting average was in the 300s, which meant, he grounded out or hit a fly ball that was caught or something much more often than he even got a base hit. So why should it be any different for psychics? Now, when I did this research with Ted Owens, I have in my files today 168 examples of demonstrations that he produced. And I would say that roughly 2/3 of those worked out according to the way he said they would. He'd send written letters to myself and other scientists saying, this is what I'm going to produce: a cold spell in the middle of summer, or a hot spell in the middle of winter, or an effect on an earthquake, a volcano, or hurricanes. And if 2/3 of those things worked out the way he said they would, that's very impressive, even if 1/3 of the time he got no result at all.
Yeah, he's doing better than Babe Ruth, in that respect.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting thing that's brought up as well in the book, and that's the public display of having these powers in regards to the esoteric teachings of many cultures. Would say that this is a detriment to the path of spiritual enlightenment. Now, this is like another layer to the the phenomena that really fascinates me. When it comes to someone like Ted Owens in doing these public displays, can you speak more to, and maybe in a little more detail than I am, about like what does that mean? Like, are we saying that it's too ego based, and someone trying to show off is detrimental to this path of spiritual enlightenment?
Well, it's very hard to judge another person. We have a tendency to want to do that, to say uh, Ted Owens was an evil person. Now, he considered himself, and I will say this, harmful things occurred. And you referred to airplane crashes, for example. Harmful things sometimes occurred in his demonstrations. I remember once I had a discussion with people about Moses, because Ted Owens used to compare himself to Moses, saying he's the greatest psychic since Moses. And Moses is regarded as a prophet, as a great spiritual leader. But if you read the Bible carefully, you'll see there was one occasion when he ordered, 20,000 people to be murdered or killed after the episode in the Bible of the worship of the golden calf. Moses instigated a reprisal against all of those members of the Jewish people who had worshipped the golden calf and had them killed. So that's far worse than anything Ted Owens ever did. So I think we have to be careful about judging other people in this regard. I'll give you another example. I once interviewed Chogyam Trungpa, who was a very famous spiritual teacher. Well, he was a chain smoker. And I said to him, how can you be a chain smoker? You're a spiritual teacher. You're harming your body. And he said, doesn't matter. When you're enlightened, you can do anything. And he died at a young age from his smoking and his drinking. So we have to be careful making judgments. But on the other hand, if you're pursuing a spiritual path, and that spiritual path involves letting go of your lower level egotistical desires, then probably showing off your psychic abilities, which Ted Owens was prone to do, wouldn't be a good idea. I think those things can be in conflict with each other. The spiritual traditions tend to say that psychic functioning is a natural thing, and as you evolve spiritually, you do acquire more and more of these abilities. But if you become attached to them, then that's going to interfere with your spiritual progression of letting go of your attachments, which makes perfect sense, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, it really resonates when you lay it out like that, and it might be a jump for me to say this, but it's and granted, this is the first time we've ever spoken, but it does seem to me that for you, spirituality just might be intertwined in all of this stuff in some degree. Because I mean, you strike me as with your thoughtfulness and your open-mindedness to be kind of like taken down a spiritual path of some kind, along with the like step by step with the scientific path. It almost feels like the science is the left foot and the spiritual is the right foot. Is that too big of an assumption I'm making?
Well, you can view it in two ways, I suppose. You could view it saying we are primates, biological creatures who are striving to have a spiritual experience, or you could say we are spirits inhabiting a physical reality, so we're having a physical experience.
I think that's a perfect example of that left foot, right foot. Yeah, it's interesting too, because with Ted Owens and whether or not the physical or the public displays of these powers, it was a hindrance to his spiritual enlightenment. Because towards the end of the book, you get into how you actually went into a session with him, like a guided meditation hypnosis session, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know. I'll be able to pronounce these words exactly right, but dysdaimonic, and then eudaimonic. How am I saying that? Like
Oh, gosh, I don't have the book in
yeah,
front of me.
it's well. Anyway, it's like basically what we're saying is, or what you're laying out in the book is that his dysfunctional use of the powerful psychic energies with which he was in contact versus the an expression of the positive side of his powers,
Right.
and it strikes me that this difference happens. One, the bad side is the public display, like look at me, look at me, look at me. And then the positive side is essentially in service to others, like trying to guide you specifically through his program that he developed to help people. And to me, that might be the most striking evidence of what we're talking about here, about how it could be a hindrance. And then like the demeanor, and it's almost like the core of someone shifts into this, I don't know, more enlightened or more calm and peaceful and loving character when trying to use these powers to serve another person and help them along.
Well, you've raised some very difficult questions here, and uh, let's compare it for a moment to maybe I'm going out on a limb, but let's look at President Trump for just a moment. Now, I happen to be a lifelong liberal Democrat, so as far as I'm concerned, everything President Trump does is inappropriate and even worse than inappropriate, evil. But his supporters think that he is an agent of God and that he can only do good. And even if he looks like he's doing something sloppy and evil and conventionally bad, like paying off a porn star, things of that sort, they say, God chooses strange characters to carry out his work. And for all I know, Ted Owens is of that sort. There are people today who are aware of Ted Owens and think of him like a religious prophet or a saint, that everything he did, even the showing off, even the harmful things, was done for a good purpose. So these things are very hard to judge. We all have our own perspective, but none of us really sees things through the eyes of God as they are ultimately. And sometimes being peaceful and quiet is a good thing, and sometimes being peaceful and quiet might be seen as acquiescing to evil. So I'm kind of caught in a dilemma here. I'm not sure that I would agree with all of the characterizations of Owens as an evil person. For example, his showing off. Well, what he was trying to do was get the attention of scientists, which seems to me if science is going to progress, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that is like a really funny part of this whole story when it comes to like the irony here, because in today's culture, especially in this world, there are groups of large segments of the people that are interested in these kinds of things that tend toward conspiratorial thinking and a little bit of paranoia, you could say, at the very least. And when it comes to like, oh, you don't want to let anybody know that you've got any kind of powers because next the government's knocking on your door. If someone had real powers, you might not even hear from them again. But then but the reality of the situation is you have a guy who is very publicly trying to get the attention of scientists and also the United States government with like, I'm showing you these mass demonstrations of these psychic abilities that I have. And nobody is really, at least on the government side, seemingly like really, giving a hoot about it. And it is like, so it kind of speaks to like, sometimes our perception of what reality could be and the harshness of what reality actually is can be very different.
I think it's fair to say that during the time that Ted Owens was desperately trying to get the attention of the U.S. government, the U.S. government was in fact engaged in exploring psychokinetic and extrasensory perception abilities. However, in Ted Owens' case, he was just too flamboyant a personality. And that's the thing. If you're a government bureaucrat and you're in charge of a program of this sort, which also at the time was funded by the CIA and was kept secret, the last thing you want to do is work with people who are publicity seekers. So that worked against him. And if he had been a kind of quiet person who demonstrated his abilities and was more pliable, the government might have expressed more interest at that time. And there were people like that, as a matter of fact, who did get involved in various government programs that were going on. And for all I know, still are going on. But, so Ted Owens, in many ways, was his own worst enemy.
Yeah, it definitely seems like he would have been like a bull in a psychic china shop when it comes to trying to keep him reined in. He wasn't shy in that way. It didn't seem like. Now, when it comes to like the career of yourself, like you've had boots on the ground in this field for a little while now. When it comes to meeting other people or coming in contact with people with special abilities, not excluding yourself, I'm curious, has there been tapping into abilities that you found on a personal level?
I have, in my own personal life, I've had many, many synchronicities and experiences of extrasensory perception, altered states of consciousness, a wide variety, but I don't profess to be psychic. I don't charge anybody for anything. I don't offer my services to anybody. It's just something I enjoy it when it happens, and I'm very interested in studying it. And it does happen frequently, and various psychic events have literally changed my life and kind of guided me on the path that I've followed. But that's really as far as it's gone in my own personal case.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like, when you say that certain psychic events have changed the course of your life, that seems like, those seem like some pretty, profound moments. Is there one that sticks out that you can share with us that really sticks out as like a great example of like, wow, this like altered the course of my life, or really brought something into fruition that maybe I wasn't anticipating, that you were really surprised by?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll give you an example of an experience that dramatically changed my life. It took place in about 1972. At the time, I was I was a graduate student at the University of California at Berkeley in criminology. I just was getting my master's degree. I have a master's degree in criminology, the study of criminals. And I made a decision that I wanted to study human deviance, but not the negative side of human deviance. I wanted to study the positive side, like psychics and intuitives and creativity. But there were no opportunities to do that at the university. You could study crime and psychopathology all you wanted, but there were no programs to study psychics or intuitives or great creative people, none. So I agonized over this for months and months. One day, I just knew that the answer was going to come to me in a dream. And that night, I did have a dream. And in this dream, I was visiting some friends who lived across town in Berkeley, California, and I knocked on the door to their apartment, and nobody answered. So I happened to know where they kept a key. In the dream, I found the key and let myself in, walked into their living room. There, in the middle of the living room floor, was a magazine named EYE. And I picked it up, And I was paging through it in my dream, and I woke up with this exhilarated feeling like, wow, this is the answer. But I had no idea what the answer really meant. So I acted out the dream. I put on my tennis shoes, ran across Berkeley, got to that apartment, knocked on the front door. Nobody was home, just as I had dreamt. And actually, I knew they kept a key under the doormat. And I opened the door, let myself in, walked into the living room, and there in the middle of their living room was, in fact, a magazine. It was named not I, but Focus. And that magazine literally brought focus to my life. It was the magazine of KQED, which is the listener-sponsored public television and radio in San Francisco. So paging through it, I made a decision that dramatically changed my life, because at that point, I didn't own a radio or a television. I was a long-haired hippie. I didn't even believe in electronic communication. I thought it was all phony baloney. The only real, authentic communication is face-to-face. I changed my mind that moment, and I went over to KPFA Radio in Berkeley, California, Pacifica, listener-sponsored station, and I volunteered. And even though I had my master's degree, they said, well, here, sit at this desk, and when you hear the doorbell ring, push this buzzer and let people in the front door. So I did that, and within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce radio programs, and they gave me my own show twice a week. And all of a sudden, I found myself sitting at a table with world-class experts in all the subjects that interested me the most, and 10,000 people listening in. And that was back in the early 1970s. I'm still doing that kind of thing. It set me on a career track that I had never even considered until that moment. And now looking back, well over 45 years later, I'm still engaged in the very same thing. So the lesson for your listeners in a story like this, I think, and I tell the story frequently, and I'm happy to share the lesson. It's simply, if you try to be the very best version of yourself, become the very best person that you can be, I think the universe will reach out to help you. It reached out to help me.
Yeah, and you were willing to pay attention.
Yeah.
You asked a question, and so many times I know we scream these questions to the heavens, so to speak, and yet we're not listening for the answer. And you really, talk about listening to the answer. You put on the shoes and went over to the friend's house, and that's got to be a fun story to tell to the friends. You're like, I'm sorry, I had a dream. I had to let myself in your apartment. Even though none of you were home, and now here we are. There's, are those radio programs archived anywhere? Are people able to access them or?
Some of them are, in fact. If you go on the website of the Pacifica Radio Network, they do have archives available, and you can order tapes. And I see they have about a dozen of my old programs listed in their archives. So it's a possibility.
Oh, that'd be a fun. This Is Your Life segment, like bringing out some of your old interview clips.
Yeah.
So it is a really fascinating journey that we can go on if we allow ourselves, and letting the universe really talk to us and really listen to it. Where do you find yourself currently that is you're let's say consumed, or obsessed might be the wrong word. Is there anything that's really caught your attention lately that you just can't get enough of?
Well, I'm putting out 3 interviews a week on the new Thinking Aloud video channel on YouTube. And I guess there's so much going on right now. The field is evolving rapidly, and it's strange. I got a doctoral degree in parapsychology in 1980 at Berkeley through an individual interdisciplinary doctoral major. I set it up after I started doing the radio programs because there was a provision at the university where you could do this, and I felt that I had the resources to do it through all the people I was interviewing on the radio as well. But it happens to be now, over 40 years later, the only doctoral diploma in parapsychology ever awarded by an accredited university anywhere in the world. So it's as if not much is happening within parapsychology, but all around parapsychology, things are going on. You have a whole new discipline, for example, called the study of near-death experience. You have large groups of people now doing physiological research on the effects of meditation. You have many, many people in philosophy looking at the idea that the world is fundamentally mental and not physical. You have all sorts of interesting research going on regarding the brain. And then, of course, quantum mechanics and the whole question of quantum interconnectivity, what they call it quantum entanglement now, suggests that everything is interconnected in the world of physics. Just as the mystics would suggest everything is interconnected in the world of the mind. So while parapsychology may appear to some people to be stagnating and going nowhere, can't even issue a second doctoral diploma in the field, it's as if the whole culture is moving forward in other interesting ways.
Yeah, maybe it's not. It's definitely not stagnant. It's just how are we measuring its movement, and are we using the traditional, measuring systems to try to figure out if the field in fact is moving forward, because there does seem to be a lot of action going on, and I think that is reflected in pop culture currently with. I know on Netflix, it seems like almost every other day there's a new movie or TV series coming out that is supernatural, paranormal, that has this kind of that has like parapsychology and or one of the themes of it, as one of the major through lines of entertainment now. And it is really fascinating to watch the explosion. And and definitely on my end, I see it as a good thing. More and more people are becoming interested. And it seems like part of me does kind of wonder if there'll ever be parapsychology as this unified field again, or as a major conglomerate, officially in an academic and scientific sense. Do you think in comparison to, let's say, the early 20th century, when I know the ASPR and the in the Society for Psychical Research first tried to what was it, they had their first congressional meeting or whatever they called it. Do you think we're headed back to there at some point, or do you think that's even necessary?
Well, when I set up my individual doctoral program at Berkeley, I defined the field a bit differently than it was defined by, let's say, J.B. Rhine at Duke University, who coined the term parapsychology or popularized it. He didn't really coin it, but he made it a name that stuck. And his idea was card guessing experiments. That was the paradigm for ESP, and dice throwing experiments for psychokinesis. And that was what the discipline was. I define the discipline as very different, having a history going back thousands of years, looking at human inquiry into the nature of paranormal phenomena. You can trace it back to Plato and even further. And I think we have to have an appreciation for the world's spiritual traditions and esoteric culture in all countries. And I actually sincerely believe that eventually universities all around the world will be offering degree programs in parapsychology defined the way I envision it. And one of the reasons I'm working so hard, putting out 3 video interviews a week, is so that when that day comes, there will be a huge video archive of resources that all of those colleges and universities can draw upon.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that you're churning the output that you are churning out, and people can go to the YouTube page. It's really easy to find, and then there's like an archive, or there's a list of all of the guests. I mean, and we're talking about, I remember one of the first interviews I saw that blew my mind. If I'm not mistaken, it was Michael Talbot, author of The Holographic Universe, on Thinking Aloud, and the original television program that you were doing, and it was just amazing. And then there's great clips of Terrence McKenna. I think you interviewed him multiple times, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So when it comes to interviews with people in the world of science, and just who are the study of consciousness and all these cutting edge or fringe or whatever people want to label them as, like, you've been doing this, you've been getting these conversations as an extension of what started as that radio program, it sounds like, for years now. And it is a great resource for people who are interested in this. If they want to hear people who are very thoughtfully dedicating their lives to the study of these things.
Yeah, I've been at it now for 45 years, doing it. So I've done well over 1,000 of them just myself, and it's been one of the great joys of my life. And I'm just delighted that I get really positive feedback from many viewers too, that it changes their life to be aware of all of this information, because I'm trying to interview the most credible people I can find, and do it in a way that gives people solid information about an area where it's hard to get good information.
Yeah, that is for sure. That it can be a real landmine out there, or like a minefield, as they say, when it comes to trying to find that credible, good information. Now, when's the big memoir? When's the big Mishlove memoir happening?
I don't know. I think I'm going to leave an archive rather than a memoir.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like somebody else is going to have to pick up the ball on that, and take the reins. It does, it fits the mold into a very very degree, because as someone who is very interested in putting out people's ideas and their work and their perspectives on things, it resonates with me that you're not so even interested in putting out your own story in that way, as much as your own story is, the collective stories of all these other people.
I tend to think, that my own personal story isn't that important. I'd rather shine the spotlight on other people primarily.
Yeah, there is. You do a great job of that. And so, if people haven't checked out New Thinking Aloud, they definitely have to check that out. For sure. They're really fascinating. If there's any topic too that someone's interested in when it comes to forward-thinking science, it really feels like it's covered. There's going to be multiple interviews there. Now, with this redefinition, or not redefinition, or of this personal definition of parapsychology, is there any large breakthrough in science recently that you feel is the biggest encourager of more people getting involved in or being able to wrap their brain around parapsychology?
Well, yeah, let me suggest, for example, there's a very interesting book written by David Kaiser, who is a historian of science at MIT. It's called How the Hippies Saved Physics. And it's about a group of people that I was very closely involved with at Berkeley in the 1970s, and who are looking at this whole issue that's just emerging back then of quantum entanglement and how it might relate to parapsychology. And out of that has come huge advances in the field of physics, as a matter of fact, things like quantum computers, for example. And we're still in physics probing the meaning of quantum entanglement. It is, Einstein at one time called it spooky action at a distance. It's very real. It's been verified over and over and over again in physics, and it may well be the basis for consciousness itself and psychic functioning and many other things. It's going to take philosophers and physicists and psychologists and parapsychologists, biologists, probably many more decades to work out all of the implications of it. But anybody today who is looking at I would call it the philosophy of physics, that is to say, not just the equations and the formalisms of quantum physics, but what does quantum physics really mean? That's, I would say, the frontier of knowledge in our culture right now, and it's affecting everything.
Yeah, and it's endlessly fascinating. On top of all of that, I wonder if there's ever a period of contemplation for someone like yourself who has experienced something or maybe not experienced something that would be ever considered classified as paranormal. Have you had any of the kind of experiences that you might classify in that way, or does it all kind of slot into some kind of scientific or experiential, framework for you?
Okay, I'm trying to understand your question. You're asking me, I think, have I ever encountered phenomena that completely defy any possibility of a scientific explanation?
Yeah, actually, that's the question I should have asked.
Yeah. Well, I don't yet have a complete scientific explanation for all the phenomenon I observed regarding Ted Owens. But that's not to say that it defies science. I'm not sure that anything he did can't eventually be explained by science. There are some people who think that science will never be able to understand the paranormal, that it's like a completely different world outside of and well beyond science. And then there are other people who think, no, science will eventually understand everything. And I guess I'm a little bit in both camps. But for example, I'm not sure that science will ever be able to understand how I feel when I listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But I do think science is capable eventually of understanding a great deal more than we now understand about things called paranormal. For example, in the field of physics, there's a big new movement called string theory. And string theory postulates 11 or 12 or 26 or sometimes an infinite number of dimensions of physical space as we know it. So if space has more than the three dimensions that we experience through our senses, then all kinds of phenomena that we now think about as paranormal outside of science entirely might well be explainable. For example, the idea of an afterlife. I've had lots of experiences that point to the existence of an afterlife, and some people, like my friend the physicist Ed May, who is a materialist, says that if the afterlife is real, he'll have to give up his materialism. I don't think so. I think that materialism as a metaphysical philosophy can be expanded to include higher dimensions of space and even, therefore, account for the possible existence of an afterlife.
Well, like that's that's really interesting when because I know a lot of the friends of mine and in the paranormal world are into interdimensional beings, and you hear about going to higher vibrations or the ascension, which is kind of, some people call it new age woo or those kinds of ways of thinking. I am fascinated by by what you said about multiple experiences about the afterlife. Is there one you could share with us so that we could leave our listeners with? Like, did Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove see a ghost? I guess is the question that people want to know right now.
Well, seeing a ghost is no big thing. They are known as apparitions. And, they're actually one of the most commonly reported psi experiences. But I'll give you one. Back in the 1970s, around the same time, I had this dream that totally changed my life concerning getting involved in media. I had another dream in which a great uncle of mine, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years, appeared to me and talked to me in a deep way about my life. And when I woke up from that dream, this has only ever happened once in my lifetime, I was singing and crying at the same time. And I was singing an old Jewish song from the sacred liturgy of the high holy holidays of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, crying. And so I wrote back to my parents and said, "How's Uncle Harry? I had a dream about him." My mother called me immediately and said, "Uncle Harry just died. How did you know?" And that experience really shook me to my bones. It's the kind of dream that seems more real than waking reality. It certainly affected my life. And it prompted me when I began asking my professors at Berkeley, if they could explain a dream like that. None of them had anything intelligent to say. And that's largely what motivated me to want to study this phenomena for myself, because I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere trying to learn about it by talking to the professors at one of the greatest universities in the world.
Wow. That's I have that brings so many more questions that I'd love to ask you, but maybe that's for another time. There's the idea of the dream world and what exactly, in regards to our understanding of it currently, and what is the potential that the dream world could be, the astral plane, all these other things. Maybe sometime in the future, we'll sit down and have another chat. But that is really fascinating stuff. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with me today. Let's let people know where they can find, is there the general hub for everything that you've got going on, on the internet?
Well, I think the best place to go would be New Thinking Allowed. That's ALLOWED. New Thinking Allowed, all one word, .com. That'll take them to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, and there are a ton of videos there, great interviews with some of the greatest minds, sit down one-on-one chats, and really enlightening, very informative, good information stuff. Check out the PK Man. If you haven't checked that out already and you want to know more about this Ted Owens guy, I mean, the idea, the image of Ted in my mind has been painted so vividly through that book that I'd be curious to know about if there's ever been anyone who's wanted to turn his story into a movie.
Yeah, there have been a few efforts, but none of them ever went very far.
Yeah, I mean he's a fascinating character and a person, a real person. So check it out. And there's a really great story. I didn't want to spoil it for people too about the about the end there, where we were talking about how, him in service to others, using his abilities to help someone else, and the synchronicity it has with you and everything else that happened in your life as well. So people should definitely check that out. Dr. Mishlove, I appreciate it. Thanks again, and keep up the good fight. And maybe one of these days I'll round up, the some people, and we'll. Really try to get this Mishlove memoir out there. We'll do all the heavy lifting, so you don't have to worry about it. Because I think people would love to hear the life story, of you, even if you're more interested in sharing other people's life's work. So we really appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you, Ryan.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to another experience of me and Paranormal You. That was Titan of Paranormal Research and Parapsychology, Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. How about a round of applause for Dr. Mishlove? Can we? I don't think I've ever done that. I wanted to give a round of applause in the outro of the Mindcast. What a fun chat with the doctor. Interesting side note. I'll let you know later how it goes. But after the interview was over, we were talking about comedy and talking about the paranormal in stand-up comedy. So I'm going to be sending Dr. Mishlove Wants the album Free Love, which you can get for free on my website, ryansingercomedy.com. So I'll keep you posted if if Dr. Mishlove listened to the album. There's some adult language on there, but we shouldn't make assumptions about what people find are funny. When you've lived in this world long enough, the word fuck doesn't bother you. It's just another word, I guess. But yeah, so Ryan Singer Comedy's got everything you could need. Links to the album, Me and Paranormal You, directs there now. That's the site, that's the hub for all things Ryan Singer. Rising on Instagram, Rising on Twitter, Me and Paranormal You also on Instagram. Let's see what else is going on. The patrons. Thank you very much to all the patrons of the Mindcast. Patreon.com/Ryan Singer. You're going to see exclusive video of paranormal investigations, paranormal PDFs that I find I will be uploading over there that are relevant or just very interesting in relating to the topics that we're covering or interviews that are coming out. So yeah, I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun listening. Thank you very much. How about give a 5-star review on iTunes? That'll help us out. Get some more people listening to the program. Spread the word. Let's do the good work and spread the word of the Mindcast. 5 more years coming down the pipe. Thank you very much. For listening. I appreciate you. I hope you appreciate yourself. I love you very much, and you should be doing the same to yourself, because that's the only person you can count on to give it to you is yourself. So do that. And so then, I'll see you at a show somewhere, a comedy show, because comedy shows are awesome. You should go to more of them. But if I don't see you at one of those, I'll see you at the Watering Hole on the astral plane.